This is the third part of the presentation on the Islands of Integrity anti-corruption methodology. I will talk about the successful experience of addressing corruption in La Paz. So this is the book that changed our mind about addressing corruption and inspired us to try to replicate this successful experience in local governments in our region, involving also trainers, facilitators who were trained in our regional program working together. In 2004, I invited Ronald Maclina Baroa to attend the regional meeting of alumni trainers and facilitators. Participants from 15 countries had the opportunity to meet Ronald Maclina Baroa and to listen to his presentation. He presented for around 2 hours his successful experience in addressing corruption. He described the very harsh context in which he started his mandate, where corruption was everywhere and public services and public authority were collapsing. He presented also how he succeeded during his administration to restore municipal services, to multiply city revenues, to increase investments in public works tenfold, and how he was re-elected 4 times back to office. I'd like now that you listen to Ronald Maclina Baroa and Robert Klitgaard. They talk 20 years after about their experience. These small videos are part of the multimedia interactive learning course developed in World Bank Institute. Enjoy.
McLean started implementing several efficiency-orientated policies. Looking through the lens of his private sector experience, he thought he could instill a business logic into the city government's modus operandi, but many of the city's practices were puzzling or opaque.
And usually in the private sector, you have a limited objective and you have plenty of resources you put there to make that happen. The public sector is the reverse. You have huge objectives and very little resources to make it work. So that's the difference between the private and the public. In this case, I had a huge mission to accomplish and very little resources to do it. So I tried to change that. I said, okay, we're going to start getting this institution to work. And I noticed that there was this particular public work. I went to visit it in the morning. The laborers wouldn't arrive before 10 o'clock because there was always a problem with the gasoline for the truck. The chauffeur was missing, whatever. They arrived about 10 o'clock to work. And by 2 o'clock, they were leaving back. So they work a few hours after, and then still they have the lunch break in the middle. And then there was always machinery missing, spare parts were missing, broken engines, flat tires. This was impossible. And I realized all this machinery is so old, zero maintenance, they are really falling apart.
The mayor tried to change the situation by reducing inefficiency and increasing information. But soon he noticed that something more profound than an administrative overhaul was needed. McLean remembered his lectures at Harvard from Professor Robert Klitgaard and decided to call on his mentor and friend to ask for his help.
And one day I got a call and said, "Bob, come down here, let's put into practice what you and I have learned."
With Bob Klitgaard, an economist with a focus on public policy, McLean hoped to be able to solve the problems on the ground. Klitgaard began his analysis by meeting with employees of various departments of the city government. He and McLean spent long hours talking and started to disentangle the problems. As they did so, a new picture emerged.
We understood that this was a problem, and there was a systemic problem. It was an institutional problem. There was there was this failure of the institution because of the incentive and information structures had collapsed.
Where the mayor had believed earlier that the problem was either incompetence or ineffectiveness, he now perceived a different force at work. The pursuit of personal enrichment at the city's expense, on a massive scale and in an organized way. In other words, systemic corruption. Klitgaard and MacLean still faced the question how to reform the corruption-ridden bureaucracy. Deciding that commonly used approaches, such as ethics education programs, would not be effective, the reformers chose an entirely different strategy, based on incentives for the employees. Except for cases of severe corruption, the incentives were positive rather than punitive. They involved improving working conditions and salaries. Most importantly, MacLean and Klitgaard actively involved employees in a participatory diagnosis process. In group sessions, they would analyze corrupt practices at City Hall and propose ways to correct them. Klitgaard met with as many employees as possible to find out what was going on in terms of corruption.
Yeah, well, one day I was looking for Professor Klitgaard, and it was about noon, and I was told he was having lunch with the secretaries. My first reaction was say, well, I didn't ask him to come that far from the United States to help us to go out with the secretaries. I was joking. And then when he came back, he was telling me what he had found out. I say, and who told you all this? And he said, why the secretaries are called secretaries? And I said, I don't know. And he said to me, because they keep the secrets. And in fact, they were the ones who really had seen much of the corruption. They knew how it operated, and they were enlightening us to understand the process. And them, plus other employees, of course, were critical to understand the problem.
The participatory process gave the employees ownership.
If you ask, how do you reach people who matter to talk to them and get their help in fighting corruption or doing anything else? The answer is to meet with them. And so we met, the mayor met, I met, others met with groups of citizens, with business people, with groups of very poor citizens in their barrios. They met with city employees who were presumably involved in corrupt cabals. And because the idea was to fight corrupt systems and not do a witch hunt, people would tell you, even people involved in corrupt schemes will tell you how a corrupt system works. If you ask them, tell me about monopoly plus discretion minus accountability, they will talk. If you ask them, tell me who's dishonest, they won't talk. So that was a secret of getting people to buy in and help, was to in effect have conversations with them which focused on systems and not bad people.
By the end of the participatory diagnosis process, Klitgaard and MacLean not only knew how corruption was working in City Hall, they also had the employees at their side.
So after his presentation, which, by the way, you can find in a more detail by reading La Paz case or the book Corrupt Cities, which both are available on the platform of this course. So after this presentation, I asked participants if this experience is relevant for their countries and if they would like to be involved in the effort of replicating it in local governments in our region. And all of them said yes, it's the same as in our countries, and we would like very much to learn how to replicate this approach in our countries. So the next question which we had to answer was how to replicate a one-time successful experience in other countries. The answers are in the next presentation about our strategy of dissemination.